Imagine a time when your neighbor could accuse you of witchcraft simply because you were different. The Salem Witch Trials are not just about witches. They're a shocking tale of fear, power, and paranoia. This dark chapter in history reveals how suspicion and hysteria can spiral out of control, leading to devastating consequences. Get ready to uncover the bizarre truths behind the Salem Witch Trials that may surprise you. What really sparked the Salem Witch Trials? It all began in 1692 in Salem Village, Massachusetts, where a group of young girls claimed to be possessed. Their frightening declarations set off a wave of panic that swept through the community. You might think this was just a case of overactive imaginations, but local rivalries and existing tensions played a huge role in this hysteria. These elements combined created a perfect storm for accusations to fly. You'll learn how a simple game of fortune-telling turned into a deadly crisis that claimed many innocent lives. Did you know that the trials were not just about witches? While many assume it was solely a witch hunt, the reality is far more complicated. The trials were deeply rooted in the social and political struggles of the time. Anger targeted individuals who had land or influence, indicating that jealousy and power struggles were at play. Many victims were seen as outcasts, making them easy scapegoats for the town's fears and frustrations. In a community rife with anxiety, the fear of the unknown bred suspicion among neighbors, leading to a witch hunt fueled by jealousy and greed. You'll discover how the social fabric of Salem unraveled under pressure, revealing the darker side of human nature. How did the legal system fail during the trials? One of the most alarming aspects of the trials was the court's reliance on spectral evidence, testimony based on visions and dreams rather than tangible proof. Imagine being accused of witchcraft with no way to defend yourself against such vague claims. Many accused witches faced this harrowing reality, often confessing under extreme pressure or threats. The judges, swayed by public opinion and fear, ignored any evidence that contradicted the accusations. You'll see how the very system meant to deliver justice was twisted in the name of righteousness, revealing the vulnerabilities in a society governed by fear. What were the long-term effects of the trials on Salem? The trials left a lasting stain on Salem's reputation, casting a shadow that would endure for generations. Families were torn apart as accusations flew and executions took place, leading to a community riddled with guilt and regret. Even after the trials ended, the scars remained, affecting relationships and trust among the townspeople. Additionally, the trials influenced future legal practices in America, sparking conversations about justice and fairness that continue today. You'll learn valuable lessons about morality, justice, and the consequences of societal panic. Who were the key players in the Salem Witch Trials? Understanding the individuals involved provides deeper insight into the events. Reverend Samuel Parris, the local minister, played a crucial role, as did the Putnam family, notorious for their aggressive accusations. Figures like Judge Samuel Sewell became symbols of the trials and justices. Victims like Rebecca Nurse emerged as martyrs for truth and justice. Their stories highlight how personal motives and community dynamics shaped the course of the trials. You'll find out how these individuals influenced events and how their legacies still resonate today. Did you know that witch trials weren't unique to Salem? Similar hunts occurred throughout Europe during this time, driven by fear and superstition. The fear of witches was widespread in colonial America, affecting many towns beyond Salem. Other communities experienced their own trials and accusations, illustrating that the Salem Witch Trials were part of a broader cultural phenomena. You'll discover the connections between different witch hunts and how the societal climate of the time created a fertile ground for hysteria. How did the trials come to an end and what followed? As time passed, the trials began to lose credibility. More people started to speak out against the accusations, and public opinion shifted against the harsh punishments meted out during the trials. The Massachusetts General Court eventually annulled the convictions, offering a small measure of justice to those wronged. Survivors sought compensation for their wrongful accusations, but the scars ran deep. You'll learn how the trials sparked a change in public conscience, leading to a more cautious approach to justice. What role did fear play in the Salem Witch Trials? Fear of the devil and evil spirits was pervasive in the community, heightened by strict Puritan beliefs. Mistrust between neighbors fostered an environment ripe for scapegoating, where anyone could be accused based on suspicion alone. The trials show us how fear can drive rational people to irrational behavior, resulting in catastrophic outcomes. You'll see how the actions driven by fear led to the town's downfall, and how this lesson remains relevant today. Were there any unusual accusations during the trials? Many accused individuals were simply different or outspoken, with their unconventional behaviors misinterpreted as signs of witchcraft. Accusations became so absurd that animals were put on trial in bizarre proceedings, and even children were not spared from suspicion. You'll be surprised by some of the outlandish claims made during this time, which reveal just how far the community's fears could stretch. How did the trials reflect societal norms of the time? The Salem Witch Trials mirrored the societal norms and expectations of the late 17th century. Gender roles played a significant part, with women being disproportionately targeted and executed. The community's fears about female power and influence were laid bare, showing how societal expectations can lead to tragic outcomes. Social status often dictated who was accused, revealing a disturbing truth about privilege and prejudice. You'll learn about the darker side of societal expectations that influence these tragic events. What can we learn from the Salem Witch Trials today? The trials offer powerful lessons about the dangers of mob mentality. When fear and paranoia take hold, tragic outcomes can follow. Understanding history allows us to recognize the signs of hysteria in our own society, emphasizing the need for critical thinking during times of crisis. You'll discover how these lessons are still applicable today, helping us navigate the complexities of our modern world. Why is the Salem Witch Trials a popular topic in modern culture? The trials have inspired countless books, movies, and plays, resonating with audiences across generations. They serve as cautionary tales about the consequences of hysteria and the dangers of allowing fear to dictate our actions. The narrative of the witch hunt continues to captivate many, drawing people to stories of injustice and redemption. You'll see how this dark history is preserved through modern storytelling and its impact on popular culture. How did the Salem Witch Trials influence American culture? They sparked important conversations about justice, civil rights, and the dangers of wrongful persecution. The trials have become a symbol of the consequences of ignoring due process and the importance of fair legal practices. Their legacy is felt in contemporary discussions about justice and societal values. You'll learn how this history continues to shape modern American identity and ideals. What was the role of religion during the trials? The Puritan beliefs of the time significantly influenced community actions. Accusations were often framed as a battle against evil, with religious leaders playing pivotal roles in perpetuating the trials. Faith was both a guiding light and a weapon used against perceived threats. You'll discover how religion shaped the narrative and fueled the fear that drove the trials. Did other cultures experience similar events to the Salem Witch Trials? Witch hunts have been common in various cultures worldwide. Many societies have faced their own forms of persecution driven by fear and superstition. Similar fears and beliefs have led to tragic outcomes across different cultures, highlighting how history can repeat itself. You'll see how the human tendency to scapegoat the other transcends time and place. What are the common misconceptions about the trials? Many people think the trials were purely about witchcraft, but this oversimplifies a complex event. Accusations were often based on personal grudges, illustrating the darker side of human nature. The trials were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of hysteria seen throughout history. You'll learn the truths behind popular myths and misconceptions about this infamous period. How has the memory of the Salem Witch Trials changed over time? Historical perspectives have shifted as society has evolved. The trials are now recognized as a dark chapter in American history, prompting memorials and educational initiatives to honor the victims. You'll discover how our interpretations of these events have changed and the ongoing relevance of this history in contemporary discussions about justice. What does the future hold for the legacy of the Salem Witch Trials? Ongoing discussions about justice, societal fears, and historical memory continue to emerge. New interpretations of the trials are being explored, emphasizing their importance in understanding current issues. Education about the trials remains crucial for preventing similar events in the future. You'll learn how the legacy of the Salem Witch Trials continues to shape our understanding of justice and humanity. Imagine a time when your neighbor could accuse you of witchcraft simply because you were different. The Salem Witch Trials are not just about witches. They're a shocking tale of fear, power, and paranoia. This dark chapter in history reveals how suspicion and hysteria can spiral out of control, leading to devastating consequences. Get ready to uncover the bizarre truths behind the Salem Witch Trials that may surprise you. Did you know that the trials were not just about witches? Many people think the trials were solely about supernatural beings and witchcraft, but the reality is far more complex. The Salem Witch Trials were deeply rooted in the social and political struggles of the time. In a society marked by economic tensions, power struggles, and personal grievances, accusations of witchcraft became a means to settle scores. Those accused often included individuals who owned land or had influence, revealing a darker side of human nature where jealousy and greed played a critical role. Imagine this: if someone in your community was doing better than you, could they become a target? Accusations often targeted individuals who were seen as threats to the existing social order. Many of the victims were outcasts, or those who simply did not conform to societal norms, making them easy targets for scapegoating. Fear of the unknown, driven by a lack of understanding about different lifestyles, bred suspicion among neighbors. You might think that in a rational society, such accusations would be dismissed. However, in Salem, fear turned rational people into accusers, leading to a frenzy that took many lives. You'll discover how jealousy and personal vendettas fueled this witch hunt, leading to tragic outcomes. When the trials began, a group of young girls claimed to be possessed by witches, sparking panic throughout Salem Village. What started as a strange game of fortune-telling spiraled out of control, igniting a firestorm of accusations and trials. The local suspicions were further amplified by existing rivalries, creating a perfect storm for chaos. So, what really happened behind the scenes? You'll find out that the witch trials served as a grim reflection of human fears, rivalries, and the dire consequences of letting paranoia take the reins. The Salem Witch Trials were marked not only by accusations but also by a legal system that failed to protect the innocent. Courts relied heavily on spectral evidence, testimony based on visions and dreams, making it nearly impossible for the accused to defend themselves. Imagine Imagine being judged based on someone else's nightmares. The very idea that someone's dreams could condemn another person shows just how distorted the pursuit of justice had become. Judges often turned a blind eye to evidence that contradicted the claims made against the accused, instead favoring the dramatic narrative spun by accusers. In many cases, confessions were coerced under pressure, leading to false admissions of guilt. Some individuals confessed to witchcraft to save their own lives, believing that a public admission might spare them from execution. This tragic reality reveals how fear can corrupt the legal system and twist the very concept of justice. You'll see how the moral fabric of Salem unraveled, leaving behind a chilling reminder of the consequences of unchecked hysteria. So, what were the long-term effects of the trials on Salem? The trials left a stain on Salem's reputation, a mark that would endure for generations. Families were torn apart, often pitting neighbor against neighbor in a battle of accusations and self-preservation. The psychological scars were deep, as many in the community grappled with guilt and regret over the lives lost. The trials didn't just affect those accused, they tore apart the very fabric of the community. Even after the trials ended, the consequences were felt long after, influencing future legal practices in America. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a cautionary tale about the importance of due process and the dangers of allowing fear to dictate justice. You'll learn valuable lessons about morality and justice, reminding us of the importance of skepticism and critical thinking in the face of mass hysteria. Who were the key players in the Salem Witch Trials? Understanding the individuals involved provides deeper insight into the events. Reverend Samuel Parris, the local minister, played a pivotal role, pushing the narrative of witchcraft in the community. The Putnam family became notorious for their aggressive accusations, often targeting their rivals and outcasts. Figures like Judge Samuel Sewall, who later expressed regret for his role, became symbols of the trial's injustices. Victims like Rebecca Nurse emerged as martyrs for truth and justice, highlighting the tragic cost of the hysteria. Their stories reveal how personal motives and community dynamics shaped the course of the trials. You'll find out how these individuals influenced events, how their actions led to the downfall of innocent lives, and how their legacies continue to be studied and debated to this day. Did you know that witch trials weren't unique to Salem? Similar hunts occurred throughout Europe during this time, driven by a collective fear of the supernatural. Fear of witches spread across colonial America, affecting many towns beyond Salem. Other communities experienced their own trials and accusations, illustrating that the Salem witch trials were part of a broader cultural phenomenon. In fact, tens of thousands of people were accused of witchcraft during a period spanning several centuries in Europe. You'll discover how interconnected these events truly were, revealing a shared history of paranoia that transcended geographical boundaries. How did the trials come to an end and what followed? Over time, the trials lost credibility as more people began to question the validity of the accusations. Public opinion shifted against the harsh punishments and executions that had dominated the previous years. The Massachusetts General Court eventually annulled the convictions, offering a small measure of justice to those wronged. Survivors sought compensation for their wrongful accusations, but the psychological scars remained. This shift in public conscience marked a significant turning point, demonstrating that even in times of crisis, people can regain their sense of justice. You'll learn how the trials sparked a change in public awareness, leading to more cautious approaches to accusations and justice. What role did fear play in the Salem witch trials? Fear of the devil and evil spirits was pervasive in the community. This fear was heightened by strict Puritan beliefs that painted the world in black and white, good versus evil. Mistrust among neighbors led to scapegoating and paranoia, as individuals sought to protect themselves from suspicion. The trials illustrate how fear can cause even rational people to behave irrationally. You'll see how fear drove the actions of townsfolk to disastrous ends, turning friends into enemies and leading to tragic consequences. Were there any unusual accusations during the trials? Many accused individuals were simply different or outspoken. Those who did not conform to societal norms were often labeled as witches. Unconventional behaviors were misinterpreted as signs of witchcraft, creating an environment ripe for hysteria. Bizarrely, even animals were put on trial, with accusations that they were in league with witches. Children also faced accusations, revealing a society gripped by panic. You'll be surprised by some of the outlandish claims made during this time, illustrating how fear can warp perceptions of reality. How did the trials reflect societal norms of the time? The Salem witch trials mirrored the societal norms and expectations of the late 17th century. Gender roles played a significant part, with women being disproportionately targeted and executed. The community's fears about female power and influence were laid bare, showing how societal expectations can lead to tragic outcomes. Additionally, social status often dictated who was accused, revealing a disturbing truth about privilege and prejudice. You'll learn about the darker side of societal expectations that influence these tragic events. What can we learn from the Salem witch trials today? The trials offer powerful lessons about the dangers of mob mentality. When fear and paranoia take hold, tragic outcomes can follow. Understanding history allows us to recognize the signs of hysteria in our own society, emphasizing the need for critical thinking during times of crisis. Now discover how these lessons are still applicable today, helping us navigate the complexities of our modern world and reminding us to question accusations misconceptions that arise from fear rather than fact. The Salem Witch Trials, a popular topic in modern culture. The trials have inspired countless books, movies, and plays, resonating with audiences across generations. They serve as cautionary tales about the consequences of hysteria and the dangers of allowing fear to dictate our actions. The narrative of the witch hunt continues to captivate many, drawing people to stories of injustice and redemption. You'll see how this dark history is preserved through modern storytelling, reminding us of our past and its lessons for the present. How did the Salem Witch Trials influence American culture? They sparked important conversations about justice, civil rights, and the dangers of wrongful persecution. Their legacy is felt in contemporary discussions about justice and societal values. You'll learn how this history continues to shape modern American identity and ideals, guiding our understanding of what is just and fair. What was the role of religion during the trials? The Puritan beliefs of the time significantly influenced community actions. Accusations were often framed as a battle against evil, with religious leaders playing pivotal roles in perpetuating the trials. Faith was used as both a guiding light and a weapon against perceived threats. You'll discover how religion shaped the narrative and fueled the fear that drove the trials, illustrating the power of belief in shaping human behavior. Did other cultures experience similar events to the Salem Witch Trials? Witch hunts have been common in various cultures worldwide. Many societies have faced their own forms of persecution driven by fear and superstition. Similar fears and beliefs have led to tragic outcomes across different cultures, highlighting how history can repeat itself. You'll see how the human tendency to scapegoat the other transcends time and place, creating a tragic cycle of blame and violence. What are the common misconceptions about the trials? Many people think the trials were purely about witchcraft, but this oversimplifies a complex event. Accusations were often based on personal grudges, illustrating the darker side of human nature. The trials were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of hysteria seen throughout history. You'll learn the truths behind popular myths and misconceptions about this infamous period, clarifying the narrative of what truly happened during the trials. How has the memory of the Salem Witch Trials changed over time? Historical perspectives have shifted as society has evolved. The trials are now recognized as a dark chapter in American history, prompting memorials and educational initiatives to honor the victims. You'll discover how our interpretations of these events have changed, and the ongoing relevance of this history in contemporary discussions about justice and morality. What does the future hold for the legacy of the Salem Witch Trials? Ongoing discussions about justice, societal fears, and historical memory continue to emerge. New interpretations of the trials are being explored, emphasizing their importance in understanding current issues. Education about the trials remains crucial for preventing similar events in the future. You'll learn how the legacy of the Salem Witch. Imagine a time when your neighbor could accuse you of witchcraft simply because you were different. The Salem Witch Trials are not just about witches. They're a shocking tale of fear, power, and paranoia. This dark chapter in history reveals how suspicion and hysteria can spiral out of control, leading to devastating consequences. Get ready to uncover the bizarre truths behind the Salem Witch Trials that may surprise you. Did you know that the trials were not just about witches? Many people think the trials were solely about supernatural beings and witchcraft, but the reality is far more complex. The Salem Witch Trials were deeply rooted in the social and political struggles of the time. In a society marked by economic tensions, power struggles, and personal grievances, accusations of witchcraft became a means to settle scores. Those accused often included individuals who owned land or had influence, revealing a darker side of human nature where jealousy and greed played a critical role. Imagine this: if someone in your community was doing better than you, could they become a target? Accusations often targeted individuals who were seen as threats to the existing social order. Many of the victims were outcasts or those who simply did not conform to societal norms, making them easy targets for scapegoating. Fear of the unknown, driven by a lack of understanding about different lifestyles, bred suspicion among neighbors. You might think that in a rational society such accusations would be dismissed. However, in Salem, fear turned rational people into accusers, leading to a frenzy that took many lives. You'll discover how jealousy and personal vendettas fueled this witch hunt, leading to tragic outcomes. When the trials began, a group of young girls claimed to be possessed by witches, sparking panic throughout Salem Village. What started as a strange game of fortune-telling spiraled out of control, igniting a firestorm of accusations and trials. The locals' suspicions were further amplified by existing rivalries, creating a perfect storm for chaos. So, what really happened behind the scenes? You'll find out that the witch trials served as a grim reflection of human fears, rivalries, and the dire consequences of letting paranoia take the reins. The Salem Witch Trials were marked not only by accusations, but also by a legal system that failed to protect the innocent. The courts relied heavily on spectral evidence, testimony based on visions and dreams, making it nearly impossible for the accused to defend themselves. Imagine being judged based on someone else's nightmares. The very idea that someone's dreams could condemn another person shows just how distorted the pursuit of justice had become. Judges often turned a blind eye to evidence that contradicted the claims made against the accused, instead favoring the dramatic narratives spun by accusers. In many cases, confessions were coerced coerced under pressure, leading to false admissions of guilt. Some individuals confessed to witchcraft to save their own lives, believing that a public admission might spare them from execution. This tragic reality reveals how fear can corrupt the legal system and twist the very concept of justice. You'll see how the moral fabric of Salem unraveled, leaving behind a chilling reminder of the consequences of unchecked hysteria. The legal system's failure became evident when we examined the trial proceedings. Courts relied on spectral evidence, which was based on the idea that the spirit or specter of a person could be seen committing witchcraft. This form of evidence was incredibly subjective and lacked any basis in factual reality. Imagine being convicted based solely on the claim that someone saw your spirit harm them while you were at home. Accused witches faced little chance of defending themselves effectively. They were often thrown into jail, enduring harsh conditions while waiting for their trials. Many confessions were forced through manipulation, threats, or even torture. Under such extreme pressure, many people confessed to crimes they did not commit, simply to avoid the gallows. Judges and juries often ignored any evidence that contradicted the accusations, believing firmly in the righteousness of their cause. You'll see how justice was distorted in the name of righteousness, leading to a chilling atmosphere of fear and control that would haunt Salem for years to come. The trials left a lasting stain on Salem's reputation, an indelible mark that would endure for generations. Families were torn apart, often pitting neighbor against neighbor in a battle of accusations and self-preservation. The psychological scars were deep, as many in the community grappled with guilt and regret over the lives lost. The trials didn't just affect those accused, they tore apart the very fabric of the community. Even after the trials ended, the consequences were felt long after, influencing future legal practices in America. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a cautionary tale about the importance of due process and the dangers of allowing fear to dictate justice. You'll learn valuable lessons about morality and justice, reminding us of the importance of skepticism and critical thinking in the face of mass hysteria. Now let's dive into who were the key players in the Salem Witch Trials. Understanding the individuals involved provides deeper insight into the events. Reverend Samuel Parris, the local minister, played a pivotal role in pushing the narrative of witchcraft in the community. His daughter and niece were among the first to exhibit strange behaviors, which they claimed were the result of witchcraft. This situation created a perfect storm for panic as Parris, motivated by a desire to protect his reputation, supported the accusations that were flooding the community. The Putnam family became notorious for their aggressive accusations, often targeting their rivals and outcasts. Figures like Judge Samuel Sewell, who later expressed regret for his role, became symbols of the trial's injustices. Victims like Rebecca Nurse emerged as martyrs for truth and justice, highlighting the tragic cost of the hysteria. Their stories reveal how personal motives and community dynamics shape the course of the trials. You'll find out how these individuals influenced events, how their actions led to the downfall of innocent lives, and how their legacies continue to be studied and debated to this day. Did you know that witch trials weren't unique to Salem? Similar hunts occurred throughout Europe during this time, driven by a collective fear of the supernatural. Fear of witches spread across colonial America, affecting many towns beyond Salem. What began as a localized event quickly morphed into a broader cultural phenomenon, where communities reacted in panic to any deviation from the norm. In fact, tens of thousands of people were accused of witchcraft during a period spanning several centuries in Europe. You'll discover how interconnected these events truly were, revealing a shared history of paranoia that transcended geographical boundaries. It's astonishing to think that in such a short period, fear could unite communities in such a destructive manner. How did the trials come to an end, and what followed? Over time, the trials lost credibility as more people began to question the validity of the accusations. Public opinion shifted against the harsh punishments and executions that had dominated the previous years. The Massachusetts General Court eventually annulled the convictions, offering a small measure of justice to those wronged. Survivors sought compensation for their wrongful accusations, but the psychological scars remained. This shift in public conscience marked a significant turning point, demonstrating that even in times of crisis, people can regain their sense of justice. You'll learn how the trials sparked a change in public awareness, leading to more cautious approaches to accusations and justice. What role did fear play in the Salem Witch Trials? Fear of the devil and evil spirits was pervasive in the community. This fear was heightened by strict Puritan beliefs that painted the world in black and white, good versus evil. Mistrust among neighbors led to scapegoating and paranoia, as individuals sought to protect themselves from suspicion. The trials illustrate how fear can cause even rational people to behave irrationally. You'll see how fear drove the actions of townsfolk to disastrous ends, turning friends into enemies and leading to tragic consequences. Were there any unusual accusations during the trials? Many accused individuals were simply different or outspoken. Those who did not conform to societal norms were often labeled as witches. Unconventional behaviors were misinterpreted as signs of witchcraft, creating an environment ripe for hysteria. Bizarrely, even animals were put on trial, with accusations that they were in league with witches. Children also faced accusations, revealing a society gripped by panic. You'll be surprised by some of the outlandish claims made during this time, illustrating how fear can warp perceptions of reality. How did the trials reflect societal norms of the time. The Salem Witch Trials mirrored the societal norms and expectations of the late 17th century. Gender roles played a significant part, with women being disproportionately targeted and executed. The community's fears about female power and influence were laid bare, showing how societal expectations can lead to tragic outcomes. Additionally, social status often dictated who was accused, revealing a disturbing truth about privilege and prejudice. You'll learn about the darker side of societal expectations that influenced these tragic events. What can we learn from the Salem Witch Trials today? The trials offer powerful lessons about the dangers of mob mentality. When fear and paranoia take hold, tragic outcomes can follow. Understanding history allows us to recognize the signs of hysteria in our own society, emphasizing the need for critical thinking during times of crisis. You'll discover how these lessons are still applicable today, helping us navigate the complexities of our modern world and reminding us to question accusations that arise from fear rather than fact. Why is the Salem Witch Trials a popular topic in modern culture? The trials have inspired countless books, movies, and plays, resonating with audiences across generations. They serve as cautionary tales about the consequences of hysteria and the dangers of allowing fear to dictate our actions. The narrative of the witch hunt continues to captivate many, drawing people to stories of injustice and redemption. You'll see how this dark history is preserved through modern storytelling, reminding us of our past and its lessons for the present. How did the Salem Witch Trials influence American culture? They sparked important conversations about justice, civil rights, and the dangers of wrongful persecution. The trials have become a symbol of the consequences of ignoring due process and the importance of fair legal practices. Their legacy is felt in contemporary discussions about justice and societal values. You'll learn how this history continues to shape modern American identity and ideals, guiding our understanding of what is just and fair. What was the role of religion during the trials? The Puritan beliefs of the time significantly influenced community actions. Accusations were often framed as a battle against evil, with religious leaders playing pivotal roles in perpetuating the trials. Faith was used as both a guiding light and a weapon against perceived threats. You'll discover how religion shaped the narrative and fueled the fear that drove the trials, illustrating the power of belief in shaping human behavior. Did other cultures experience similar events to the Salem Witch Trials? Witch hunts have been common in various cultures worldwide. Many societies have faced their own forms of persecution driven by fear and superstition. Similar fears and beliefs have led to tragic outcomes across different cultures, highlighting how history can repeat itself. You'll see how the human tendency to scapegoat the other transcends time and place, creating a tragic cycle of blame and violence. What are the common misconceptions about the trials? Many people think the trials were purely about witchcraft, but this oversimplifies a complex event. Accusations were often based on personal grudges, illustrating the darker side of human nature. The trials were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of hysteria seen throughout history. You'll learn the truths behind popular myths and misconceptions about this infamous period, clarifying the narrative of what truly happened during the trials. How has the memory of the Salem Witch Trials changed over time? Historical perspectives have shifted as society has evolved. The trials are now recognized as a dark chapter in American history, prompting memorials and educational initiatives to honor the victims. You'll discover how our interpretations of these events have changed and the ongoing relevance of this history in contemporary discussions about justice and morality. What does the future hold for the legacy of the Salem Witch Trials? Ongoing discussions about justice, societal fears, and historical memory continue to emerge. New interpretations of the trials are being explored, emphasizing their importance in understanding current issues. Education about the trials remains crucial for preventing similar events in the future. Now, you'll learn how the legacy of the Salem Witch Trials continues to shape our understanding of justice, humanity, and the importance of standing against fear-fueled accusations. What were the long-term effects of the Salem Witch Trials on Salem? While many might think of the trials as a distant memory, the reality is that they left a lasting stain on the community's reputation. The fallout from these tragic events was felt for generations, creating a ripple effect that transformed lives and altered the fabric of the town. You'll learn about the guilt and regret that haunted Salem, as well as the broader implications for justice in America. The Salem Witch Trials, which began in 1692, were not just an isolated incident, but a reflection of the societal tensions of the time. The trials led to the execution of 20 people and the imprisonment of many others, creating a community forever marked by fear and suspicion. Families were torn apart due to accusations, with some members turning against one another in a desperate bid for survival. The trauma experienced during this period did not simply fade away. It echoed through the lives of those who lived in Salem long after the trials ended. Imagine living in a place where the air is thick with fear, where every neighbor could become an accuser, and where the innocence of a friend could lead to a death sentence. This atmosphere of paranoia meant that the community struggled with a profound sense of guilt and regret for many years. People were left questioning their own beliefs and actions, wondering how they could have been swept up in such madness. You'll find out how this collective trauma shaped the identity of Salem and its residents, creating a town that had to reckon with its dark past. The effects of the trials also reached beyond personal tragedy. They influenced legal practices in America as a whole. In the aftermath, there was a significant reevaluation of the legal system, particularly concerning the treatment of the accused, and he began to advocate for a more fair and just legal process, leading to a greater emphasis on the protection of individual rights. The Salem Witch Trials highlighted the dangers of mob mentality and the importance of evidence in court proceedings. Interestingly, the trials sparked conversations about due process that resonate today. The horrors of the witch hunts prompted future generations to think critically about justice, emphasizing the necessity of protecting the rights of the accused. The legal reforms that followed the trials were not just about correcting past wrongs, but also about preventing similar injustices from occurring in the future. You'll discover how the lessons learned from Salem continue to shape the way we think about justice and fairness in our society. As you delve deeper into the story of the Salem Witch Trials, you'll learn that the town of Salem itself became a case study for understanding the complex relationship between fear and justice. The phrase witch hunt still carries weight today, often used to describe situations where individuals or groups are unfairly targeted based on suspicion rather than evidence. The events of 1692 serve as a reminder of how easily fear can cloud judgment and lead to catastrophic consequences. In this exploration, we'll also examine the personal stories of those affected by the trials. Many families were torn apart, with some members executed and others left to deal with the stigma of accusation. Survivors lived in a community that had become distrustful and fractured, making it challenging to rebuild relationships. The legacy of the trials did not only affect the victims but also left deep scars on their families, friends, and the community as a whole. While the trials themselves were a product of their time, the emotional and psychological impacts lingered long after the last accusation was made. You'll see how individuals who survived the trials had to navigate their lives in a community filled with suspicion, creating a culture where distrust often overshadowed friendship. This reality led to a reevaluation of societal norms and the recognition of the importance of compassion and understanding. As we piece together the long-term effects of the Salem Witch Trials, you'll uncover how they influenced not only local practices but also broader societal changes. The trials illuminated the necessity for accountability and leadership and the importance of questioning authority, which laid the groundwork for future movements advocating for human rights and social justice. The lessons learned from this dark period continue to resonate in contemporary discussions about morality, justice, and the power of fear. To understand the complete impact of the Salem Witch Trials, we must also consider how they have been memorialized in history. Trials are often portrayed in literature, film, and popular culture, serving as cautionary tales about the consequences of fear-driven actions. This cultural memory serves as a reminder of the past, ensuring that the mistakes made during this turbulent time are not forgotten. Throughout this journey, you'll learn how the trials not only shaped the identity of Salem, but also contributed to ongoing conversations about justice and morality in America. By examining the long-term effects of the trials, we gain valuable insights into human behavior and the importance of empathy, understanding, and critical thinking in our society. In summary, the Salem Witch Trials left a profound and lasting impact on both the community of Salem and the broader landscape of American justice. The guilt and regret that followed the trials, along with the changes in legal practices, demonstrate the importance of learning from history. As we reflect on the events of 1692, we're reminded of the fragility of justice in the face of fear and paranoia, urging us to remain vigilant in protecting the rights of the individual against the collective hysteria that can arise in times of a crisis. Imagine living in a time when a simple disagreement or a slight difference could lead to your death. The Salem Witch Trials were not just about witchcraft. They were a dark narrative of fear, power, and paranoia. The individuals involved were not just victims or villains. They were complex characters caught in a web of social and political struggles. In this section, we're going to delve deep into who these key players were and how their actions shaped the course of the trials. You might be surprised to learn that Reverend Samuel Parris, the minister of Salem Village, played a pivotal role in igniting the witch hysteria. Initially, he was not just a religious leader, but a man embroiled in local conflicts and tensions. Parris had recently arrived in Salem, and his arrival was met with mixed feelings. He wanted to be a prominent figure in the community, but his ambition quickly turned into desperation as the witch trials unfolded. Did you know that he was deeply concerned about his reputation? The pressure to maintain his authority pushed him to support the accusations, even when evidence was flimsy at best. Another key player in the trials was the Putnam family, especially Thomas Putnam. This family was notorious for their aggressive accusations against others. They had their own motives. Many of the accused were people who had property or land that the Putnams coveted. In a society where wealth was intertwined with social status, these accusations served a dual purpose. They not only eliminated competitors, but also served to solidify the Putnams' influence in the community. You may find it shocking, but many victims were targeted simply because they were wealthy or owned land. The irony? Those who were supposed to protect the community were often the ones exploiting it. And what about the judges? Some of them became symbols of the trial's injustices. For instance, Judge Samuel Sewall, who initially endorsed the trials, later expressed regret for his actions. His journey from a firm believer in the trials to a man consumed by guilt is a stark reminder of how easily people can lose their moral compass in the face of hysteria. This change of heart might have seemed trivial at the time, but it reflected prompted a growing awareness of the trial's injustices. Did you know that after the trials, Sewell publicly acknowledged his mistakes and even petitioned for forgiveness from the families of the victims? His actions sparked conversations about accountability and justice that resonate even today. Now let's not forget the victims. Figures like Rebecca Nurse emerged as martyrs for truth and justice. A well-respected member of the community, she was accused despite her good standing. Her trial and execution represented the tragedy of the witch hunts, the loss of innocent lives based on mere accusations. It's heartbreaking to think that someone who contributed positively to society could be condemned so easily. Many of her family members, including her sister and her husband, were left to grapple with the aftermath. The trials were not just events. They were personal tragedies that devastated families. But the Salem Witch Trials weren't isolated. They were part of a broader context of social tensions and rivalries. Accusations often stemmed from long-standing feuds or economic rivalries. Communities were fracturing under the pressure of fear and suspicion, leading neighbors to turn against each other. You may wonder how a seemingly small conflict could escalate to such devastating proportions. The answer lies in the fragile social fabric of Salem, where minor grievances were magnified by fear and paranoia. As we explore these key players, it becomes clear that the Salem Witch Trials were a complex interplay of ambition, greed, and fear. Each individual contributed to a narrative that spiraled out of control, leading to one of the darkest chapters in American history. It's essential to understand their motivations, as it reveals how quickly fear can overtake reason and lead to tragic outcomes. To summarize, the Salem Witch Trials were not merely about witches. They were deeply intertwined with the lives of real people, some seeking power, others merely trying to survive. The roles played by Reverend Samuel Parris, the Putnam family, judges like Samuel Sewell, and martyrs like Rebecca Nurse demonstrate the complex dynamics at play. Each character's actions and motivations shape the trial's course, leaving a lasting legacy that we still discuss today. You'll discover how these intertwined lives and decisions transformed a community and affected countless families for generations. Understanding this context is crucial as we continue our journey through the bizarre history of the Salem Witch Trials. Did you know that witch trials weren't unique to Salem? As the flames of paranoia and fear swept through Salem Village, they weren't just affecting one small town in Massachusetts. Similar events were unfolding across Europe and the American colonies. In this section, we will explore the broader context of witch hunts, their cultural significance, and how interconnected these events truly were. Most people think of the Salem Witch Trials as an isolated incident, but the reality is that the fear of witches was a widespread phenomenon that affected many communities. In fact, during the same period as the Salem trials, Europe was undergoing its own witch hunts, resulting in thousands of executions. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, an estimated 40,000 to 100,000 people were killed across Europe, many of whom were women. It's a shocking statistic that underscores how deeply embedded the fear of witchcraft was in society. As we examine the Salem witch trials, it becomes clear that they were part of a larger cultural movement. The hysteria in Salem was not a standalone event. It was deeply influenced by a long history of witch hunts that had occurred in Europe. These trials were often fueled by a combination of religious fervor, economic strife, and social instability. For instance, during the late 16th and early 17th centuries, Europe experienced significant turmoil, including the Protestant Reformation and the 30 Years' War. These conflicts created a breeding ground for fear, where the scapegoating of witches became a way to cope with uncertainty and chaos. In colonial America, the fear of witches was particularly pronounced. The settlers brought with them European beliefs, which were further magnified by their challenging new environment. The New England colonies were characterized by strict Puritan beliefs that viewed the world through a lens of good versus evil. This black and white worldview left little room for nuance or dissent. Accusations could be easily made against those who strayed from the norm. You may be surprised to learn that in many instances, accusations were rooted in personal grievances, where neighbors used the trials as an opportunity to settle scores. Moreover, communities across New England experienced their own versions of witch hunts. For example, in Connecticut, the trial of a woman named Mary Johnson in 1648 was one of the early cases, and her eventual execution reflected the same patterns of fear and suspicion seen in Salem. The parallels between these trials reveal a troubling truth. The Salem witch trials were not an anomaly, but part of a widespread societal reaction to fear and uncertainty. It raises the question of how easily a community can turn on itself when it is gripped by fear. What about the role of women in these trials? The vast majority of those accused were women, often viewed as outsiders or nonconformists. This reflects societal norms where women were often blamed for misfortunes. In many European trials, women who were herbalists, midwives, or simply too outspoken found themselves in peril. The witch hunts in both Europe and America reflect deeply rooted gender biases, where women's bodies became sites of blame and control. A particularly strange fact about witch trials in Europe is that, in some cases, animals were accused and put on trial for witchcraft as well. Cats, especially black ones, were often linked to witches and faced dire consequences. Imagine a courtroom where a cat is being tried for witchcraft, complete with charges and witnesses. This absurdity highlights the irrational fears that fueled these events. As we dive deeper into the Salem witch trials, we will uncover how these interconnected events reveal a complex web of societal fears that went beyond just the the accusation of witchcraft. They mirror the struggles and anxieties of the time, showcasing how communities can become engulfed in hysteria when faced with fear and uncertainty. In summary, the Salem Witch Trials were not just an isolated event. They were part of a broader context of witch hunts that spanned both Europe and the American colonies. Understanding this connection reveals the patterns of fear, scapegoating, and social upheaval that can lead to tragic outcomes. It also prompts us to reflect on our own societal behaviors today. When fear prevails, how easily can we too become caught up in a cycle of accusation and blame? This perspective will be vital as we continue to explore the bizarre history of the Salem Witch Trials. How did the trials come to an end and what followed? As the Salem Witch Trials progressed, something remarkable happened. Doubt began to creep in. What seemed like an unstoppable wave of hysteria slowly began to falter. People started to question the validity of the accusations, and the legal system itself began to show cracks. In this section, we'll explore how public opinion shifted, leading to the eventual cessation of the trials and the broader implications that followed. At the height of the trials, accusations flew with alarming speed, and as more and more individuals were arrested and convicted, skepticism started to take root. A significant turning point occurred when prominent figures, including the governor of Massachusetts, William Phips, became increasingly concerned about the fairness of the proceedings. Phips was alarmed by the fact that the trials relied heavily on spectral evidence, testimony based on dreams and visions rather than concrete proof. This type of evidence seemed dubious, even to the most fervent believers in witchcraft. An interesting fact to ponder: most people assumed that the trials were unanimously supported, but in reality, many in the community were horrified by the spectacle unfolding around them. A wave of dissent began to rise, particularly as respected members of the clergy and community leaders began to voice their concerns about the integrity of the trials. These voices of reason started to challenge the narrative that had dominated Salem for months. You might find it surprising that even the judges who had played a role in the trials started to express doubt, leading to an internal conflict about justice and morality. Amidst this turmoil, the Massachusetts General Court was convened to review the situation. The growing dissent reached a point where the court eventually annulled many of the convictions. The trials were declared illegitimate, and a collective sigh of relief washed over Salem. However, the damage was already done. Families were torn apart, lives were irrevocably altered, and a dark cloud hung over the community. One controversial point to consider: despite the eventual annulment of convictions, many survivors and families of the accused received little to no compensation for the injustices they faced. Some might argue that the justice system failed them twice, first in the wrongful accusations and second in the lack of restitution. It's a stark reminder of how societal fears can lead to profound injustices. In the aftermath of the trials, the community grappled with a profound sense of guilt and regret. The emotional scars left by the trials were deep. Families who had once been neighbors found it difficult to trust one another. Many of the accusers faced social ostracization as their roles in the witch hunt became more widely known. People began to realize that the hysteria had not only ruined innocent lives, but had also torn the very fabric of their community apart. A lesser-known fact is that the events of the Salem Witch Trials significantly influenced future legal practices in America. The experience of these trials highlighted the need for safeguards in the judicial system, leading to the establishment of principles that protect individuals from wrongful convictions. This marked a significant shift towards due process in American law, emphasizing the necessity of evidence and fair trials. As we reflect on the end of the Salem Witch Trials, it's essential to recognize that the repercussions extended far beyond the immediate aftermath. The trials ignited a cultural memory that would resonate through history. They served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mob mentality and the fragility of justice in times of fear. The lessons learned in Salem became integral to discussions about human rights and legal protections in the years to come. In summary, the conclusion of the Salem Witch Trials was not just about the cessation of accusations, but a transformative moment for justice in America. The trials left a lasting impact on the community, raising questions about morality, fairness, and the role of fear in shaping societal actions. As we continue to delve into this dark chapter, we'll uncover how the legacy of these trials influences us even today. The past, after all, is a mirror reflecting our present. What role did fear play in the Salem Witch Trials? To fully grasp the scale and consequences of the Salem Witch Trials, we must dive into the heart of what drove the community into a frenzy. Fear was not just an emotion. It became a powerful catalyst for action that turned neighbor against neighbor and friend against friend. In this section, we will unravel how this fear permeated every aspect of life in Salem and ultimately led to devastating consequences. Imagine living in a society where every dark corner could hide an evil spirit and every whispered rumor could spell doom. For the people of Salem, fear of the devil and evil spirits was a pervasive force that shaped their reality. The Puritans believed strongly in the supernatural, viewing the world through a lens of good versus evil. This belief system not only influenced their daily lives but also intensified the paranoia that would explode during the trials. You might be surprised to learn that fear can often distort perception and judgment. It creates a cycle where rationality gives way to irrationality. Many people think that fear only affects the weak or vulnerable, but the reality is that even the most rational individuals can succumb to it. In Salem, the pervasive fear led townsfolk to scapegoat their neighbors for various misfortunes, be it crop failures, illnesses, or even personal grudges. One strange yet telling example of this fear was the witch cake. This bizarre remedy was used by some in Salem to determine if someone was a witch. Made from rye flour and the urine of an accused witch, it was believed that a dog would eat the cake and then reveal the identity of the witch. While many might chuckle at this absurd practice, it highlights how fear can lead to outlandish and irrational actions. As tensions rose, accusations flourished. The residents of Salem were not merely accusing individuals based on tangible evidence. They were reacting to an overwhelming sense of fear. Mistrust among neighbors became rampant, breeding an environment ripe for scapegoating. People began to look for explanations for their fears and the unknown, and witches became the perfect target. The question remains, how did such a strong societal belief in the supernatural translate into tangible harm? The fear of witchcraft wasn't just about the belief in the supernatural. It was intertwined with the strict Puritan beliefs that governed daily life in Salem. The Puritan faith emphasized the existence of evil in the world, and their strict moral code left little room for deviation. Any behavior that strayed from the norm was viewed with suspicion, leading to accusations of witchcraft. You might not agree with this point, but it's important to understand that the Puritan worldview created an atmosphere where fear thrived. As fear took hold, the trials began to spiral out of control. The townsfolk, driven by paranoia, often relied on spectral evidence, testimonies based on dreams and visions that lacked any real foundation. This reliance on dubious evidence demonstrates how fear can override logic and justice. Many accused individuals found themselves powerless to defend against such unfounded claims, leading to a tragic erosion of due process. A lesser-known fact about the Salem Witch Trials is that this atmosphere of fear had real-world consequences that extended far beyond the immediate accusations. The fallout from the trials caused significant social and emotional damage within the community. Families were torn apart, friendships shattered, and the fabric of the community was irrevocably altered. As people turned on each other, the scars of fear left deep emotional wounds that would linger long after the trials ended. In examining the role of fear in the Salem Witch Trials, we can draw parallels to contemporary society. Modern events still demonstrate how fear can drive irrational behavior and result in tragic outcomes. Whether through mass hysteria or social panic, fear remains a powerful motivator in human behavior. As we reflect on the influence of fear during the Salem Witch Trials, it becomes evident that this fear was not merely an emotion. It was a force that dictated actions, shaped beliefs, and led to profound injustices. Trials serve as a powerful reminder of the consequences of allowing fear to dictate our responses and perceptions. In the context of the Salem Witch Trials, fear was the catalyst that turned a community into a battleground of paranoia and hysteria, leaving a legacy that still resonates today. Were there any unusual accusations during the trials? The Salem Witch Trials, a time of hysteria and paranoia, gave rise to some truly bizarre accusations. This section will delve into the strange claims made during this period, revealing how a society under stress can turn to the most unlikely suspect. You might be shocked to learn that accusations didn't just target those who were seen as different. They also encompassed behaviors and beliefs that, under normal circumstances, would be considered innocuous. Picture a community gripped by fear, where even the slightest deviation from the norm could lead to dire consequences. Many accused individuals were simply different or outspoken. Imagine a woman who spoke her mind during a town meeting, or a man who preferred to keep to himself. These were the very traits that could land someone in the crosshairs of suspicion. Societal pressure to conform was immense, and anything outside of the accepted behavior became fodder for accusations. Most people think that being outspoken is a sign of confidence, but in Salem, it often meant you were a witch. A strange fact that illustrates this point is that a significant number of the accused were actually members of marginalized groups, including the elderly, the poor, and even those with disabilities. Their vulnerabilities made them easy targets. For example, one of the most famous accused witches, Tituba, was a slave who had been brought to Salem from the Caribbean. Her outsider status, coupled with her different cultural beliefs, made her a prime candidate for suspicion. The irony is palpable. Tituba was seen as a witch simply because she represented the other in a community desperately clinging to its own identity. As the trials progressed, accusations spiraled into absurdity. Unconventional behaviors were often misinterpreted as signs of witchcraft. For instance, a woman might be accused of witchcraft simply because she had a peculiar way of knitting, or because her garden produced particularly vibrant flowers. People began to look for signs everywhere, leading to a climate where even innocent actions could be misconstrued. You might find it hard to believe, but even animals were put on trial, with charges ranging from causing harm to livestock to being familiars of the witches. Imagine a pet dog being accused of witchcraft and sentenced to death. That happened in Salem. In addition to adults, children also faced accusations, which reflects the sheer panic that engulfed the community. The innocence of youth was no protection against the tide of fear. One child's strange behavior could lead to a frenzy of accusations. In fact, some of the initial accusations came from a group of young girls who claimed to be afflicted by witches, a testimony that was taken as gospel. It's fascinating and disturbing to realize that the fears of a few children could ripple out and devastate a community community. The outlandish claims made during this time serve as a stark reminder of how fear can distort reality. Neighbors turned against each other, family members became accusers, and the very fabric of the community unraveled. You may be thinking, surely people must have known this was ridiculous. But the reality is that fear can cloud judgment to the point where logic and reason are tossed aside. People were so desperate to find a scapegoat for their misfortunes that they readily accepted the absurd. At this point, you might wonder how these accusations were justified. The answer lies in the culture of the time. The Puritans who settled in Salem held deeply ingrained beliefs about the supernatural and the existence of evil. They were conditioned to see the world through a lens of sin and punishment. This worldview made it easy to conflate normal human behavior with witchcraft. For example, the belief that a bad harvest was a punishment from God led to suspicion of those who were not devoutly religious. Most people think that strong religious beliefs would protect a community from such hysteria, but in Salem, they instead fanned the flames of fear. The outlandish claims made during the Salem Witch Trials revealed the chaos and irrationality that can emerge from a society gripped by fear. The history of these accusations teaches us that in times of panic, the most innocent among us can be unjustly targeted. The witch trials serve as a chilling reminder of what happens when fear overrides reason, and how societal norms can dictate who is deemed worthy of suspicion. As we continue to explore the consequences of the Salem Witch Trials, let us remember the importance of critical thinking and compassion in the face of fear. How did the trials reflect societal norms of the time? The Salem Witch Trials were not merely an isolated event focused on witchcraft. They were a profound reflection of the societal norms and expectations that governed life in 17th century Puritan New England. This section will explore how gender roles, social status, and community dynamics influenced who was accused and why. To set the stage, let's delve into the rigid gender roles that define Salem society. Most people think that all societies treat genders equally, but the reality is that in Salem, women were often seen as inherently more susceptible to the devil's temptations. The trials exposed a deep-seated fear of female power and independence. Women who strayed from traditional roles, those who were outspoken, single, or held property, were at a much higher risk of being accused. For example, if a woman was widowed and managed her own affairs, she might be seen as a threat to the established order. A shocking fact is that around 78% of those accused during the trials were women, highlighting the disproportionate targeting based on gender. This societal dynamic created a fertile ground for accusations. Imagine living in a community where simply being different could lead to dire consequences. When tensions ran high, it became easy for individuals to redirect their frustrations toward those who didn't conform to societal norms. The young girls who began the accusations often did so under the guise of claiming to be afflicted. They exploited the existing societal fears, and their cries carried weight, resulting in the persecution of many women who did not fit into the expected mold. But it wasn't just women who were accused. Men were also swept up in the hysteria, though to a lesser extent. Accusations often reflected underlying social rivalries. The trials were a means of settling scores and asserting power within the community. An interesting twist in this narrative is that social status often dictated the likelihood of accusations. Those who were wealthier or held influence found themselves scrutinized as potential witches by those envious of their standing. Ironically, this meant that while some women were persecuted for their independence, others faced accusations simply because their social standing threatened someone else. As we unravel these complexities, it's clear that fear of the unknown played a significant role in the Salem Witch Trials. The Puritans lived in a world filled with uncertainty, where natural disasters, disease, and economic hardships were prevalent. In such a climate, attributing misfortune to witchcraft became a convenient explanation. Harvest occurred, the community could rally together and seek a scapegoat instead of facing the harsh reality of their circumstances. The trials served as a distraction from the underlying issues plaguing the village, allowing people to cast blame and find a semblance of control over their chaotic lives. You may find it surprising, but these societal norms were not unique to Salem. Similar patterns of behavior can be observed throughout history in various societies grappling with fear and uncertainty. This illustrates a troubling truth. When faced with crisis, communities often turn against their own, seeking to eliminate perceived threats rather than confronting the systemic issues at play. The trials also mirrored the community's fears about female power, revealing how deeply ingrained misogyny influenced perceptions of witchcraft. Besides, women who were seen as too assertive or independent became prime targets, further entrenching the stereotype of the witch as a powerful, manipulative female. This perspective not only reflected the gender norms of the time, but also reinforced them, as accusations were made against those who deviated from traditional roles. Ultimately, the Salem Witch Trials serve as a chilling reminder of how societal norms can dictate who is deemed worthy of suspicion. The complex interplay of gender roles, social status, and community dynamics created a perfect storm for hysteria, leading to the tragic outcomes we now study as cautionary tales. As we reflect on these events, it's crucial to consider how these societal constructs can still influence behavior today, urging us to remain vigilant against similar patterns of injustice and fear-driven accusations in our own time. What can we learn from the Salem Witch Trials today? The Salem Witch Trials, a haunting chapter in American American history offer us invaluable lessons that extend far beyond their grim narrative. Most people believe that events like these are relics of the past, but the reality is that they resonate profoundly with modern issues surrounding justice, fear, and societal dynamics. To understand the significance of these lessons, let's begin by acknowledging the dangers of mob mentality. During the trials, a collective hysteria engulfed Salem, causing ordinary citizens to turn against one another with alarming fervor. Intriguing fact is that during periods of panic, the human brain often prioritizes group consensus over critical reasoning. This phenomenon can lead to tragic outcomes, as seen when innocent people were accused and executed without solid evidence. Imagine living in a world where your voice could be drowned out by the frantic cries of others, where rationality was replaced by fear. This lesson is critical in today's climate, where misinformation and social media can amplify collective fears and lead to wrongful accusations in various contexts. The Salem Witch Trials also teach us about the perils of unchecked fear and paranoia. The community's dread of witchcraft was fueled by strict Puritan beliefs and the unknown. When things went awry, be it a failed crop or a sudden illness, the blame often fell on those who were different or those who challenged societal norms. This creates a dangerous precedent, the scapegoating of marginalized individuals in times of uncertainty. A controversial point here is that many societies today still demonstrate a tendency to target outliers during crisis. By recognizing this pattern, we can strive to cultivate compassion and understanding rather than suspicion and hatred. Furthermore, the trials underscore the importance of understanding history to prevent similar events from occurring. The past holds a mirror to our present and future. By studying events like the Salem Witch Trials, we can better appreciate the importance of due process and fair trials. An alarming fact is that throughout history, many legal systems have deviated from these principles during times of crisis, prioritizing swift judgments over justice. This historical awareness can help us advocate for legal reforms that protect individual rights, especially for those in vulnerable positions. Critical thinking emerges as an essential tool for navigating crises. During the trials, many individuals confessed to witchcraft under extreme duress, showcasing how fear can warp reality. Encouraging critical thinking and fostering healthy skepticism are vital to avoid falling into the traps of groupthink and irrationality. The trials remind us that when fear reigns, the truth often suffers. A little-known fact is that some of the accusers later recanted their statements, revealing the immense pressure they faced. We must cultivate an environment where individuals feel safe to question, challenge, and discuss rather than succumb to fear-based narratives. As we reflect on the Salem Witch Trials, it becomes evident that the lessons we draw from this dark history are not just for historians, but for all of us. These events prompt us to confront our biases, challenge societal norms, and stand against injustice. By keeping the spirit of inquiry alive, we can learn from the past and foster a future grounded in understanding, empathy, and justice. The echoes of Salem should serve as a reminder of our responsibility to uphold the principles of fairness and humanity, ensuring that history does not repeat itself. As we navigate today's complex world, let us carry forward the lessons learned from this chapter, continually striving for a more just society. Why is the Salem Witch Trials a popular topic in modern culture? This dark chapter of history continues to resonate today, fascinating audiences around the world. Most people think that these trials are merely historical curiosities, but the reality is they serve as cautionary tales that reflect enduring themes of fear, power, and social injustice. The Salem Witch Trials have inspired countless books, movies, and plays, capturing the imagination of writers and filmmakers alike. An interesting fact is that the trials have been reinterpreted in various forms, from Arthur Miller's The Crucible to modern horror films. These adaptations often explore themes of paranoia and societal scapegoating, which remain relevant in today's world. In a sense, the trials have morphed into a narrative framework through which we can examine contemporary issues like mob mentality and the consequences of hysteria. At their core, the trials serve as a stark reminder of the consequences of irrational fears. In the face of crisis, communities can turn against their own, leading to tragic outcomes. This cultural phenomenon resonates deeply in our current climate, where fear can lead to irrational behavior and scapegoating of marginalized groups. Challenges us to reflect on how easily society can devolve into chaos when suspicion outweighs reason. A somewhat controversial notion is that many modern social movements can inadvertently mirror the hysteria of the past, if not grounded in critical thinking and rational discourse. Recognizing this parallel encourages us to engage thoughtfully with societal issues rather than reacting impulsively. Moreover, the narrative of the Salem Witch Trials captivates audiences because it involves the universal themes of justice and redemption. People are drawn to stories of individuals who stood against injustice, like the victims of the trials who were falsely accused and executed. The stories of martyrs, such as Rebecca Nurse, have transformed them into symbols of resilience against oppression. The trials highlight the importance of due process and the protection of individual rights, concepts that remain vital in modern legal systems. A rare insight is that even in the face of overwhelming societal pressure, some individuals manage to maintain their integrity, reminding us of the strength of the human spirit. The Salem Witch Trials also provide a lens through which we can explore how history shapes contemporary values. They prompt us discussions about civil liberties, the role of government, and the consequences of fear-driven policies. As we navigate the complexities of our society today, the trials urge us to consider the fragility of justice and the importance of vigilance in protecting our rights. It's fascinating to think about how these historical events continue to influence modern legal practices and societal norms. In conclusion, the Salem Witch Trials serve not just as a historical footnote, but as a cultural touchstone that challenges us to confront our own biases and the potential for injustice within our societies. They remind us that the past is never truly behind us. It informs our present and shapes our future. The tales from Salem encourage us to engage with our history critically, fostering a more empathetic and just society. As we reflect on these events, we are called to remember that understanding our past is crucial for preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future. This historical lens gives us the power to question, reflect, and ultimately advocate for a more equitable world. How did the Salem Witch Trials influence American culture? This question leads us into an exploration of the profound impact these trials had on the fabric of American society and its legal system. Most people think of the trials merely as a historical curiosity, a dark chapter that can be closed with little thought to its implications. But the reality is, they set a precedent for discussions about justice, civil rights, and the importance of due process. The trials were characterized by a complete disregard for due process, where the accused were often denied the basic rights to a fair trial and proper defense. This raises an intriguing question. How did such blatant injustice occur in a society that prided itself on legal principles? The answer lies in the societal fears and mass hysteria that dominated Salem, leading to decisions that would haunt the American legal landscape for centuries. Interestingly, the trials became a catalyst for future legal reforms. Many historians argue that they highlighted the need for protections against wrongful persecution, contributing to the development of the presumption of innocence, a fundamental principle in modern legal systems. It's somewhat controversial to suggest that the trials themselves served a purpose in shaping the legal landscape, but this perspective encourages viewers to think critically about how such tragedies can lead to positive change. A little-known fact is that the aftermath of the trials led to the eventual disbandment of the special court that oversaw them. This marked a significant shift in judicial practice, reflecting a broader movement towards ensuring justice and fairness. This history teaches us that vigilance is essential in safeguarding our rights, reminding us that the struggle for justice is ongoing. The Salem Witch Trials also symbolize wrongful persecution, echoing throughout American culture as a warning against scapegoating and the dangers of mob mentality. They remind us of the consequences of societal fear, particularly regarding marginalized groups. The trials serve as a stark reminder of how quickly communities can turn against their own, resulting in tragic outcomes for innocent individuals. As we reflect on this dark history, we see its influence not only in the legal arena, but also in literature and popular culture. Countless stories have been inspired by the Salem Witch Trials, examining themes of hysteria, injustice, and redemption. This cultural resonance keeps the memory of the trials alive, encouraging new generations to learn from past mistakes. In conclusion, the Salem Witch Trials profoundly influenced American culture, igniting discussions about justice, civil rights, and the need for due process. They serve as a powerful reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a teacher, providing valuable lessons for the present and future. As we continue to grapple with issues of justice and fairness in our society, the legacy of the Salem Witch Trials remains relevant, urging us to reflect on our past and strive for a more equitable future. What was the role of religion during the trials? The Salem Witch Trials were not just a social phenomenon. They were deeply intertwined with the religious beliefs of the time. Most people think that the trials were solely about witchcraft and the supernatural, but the reality is that they were heavily influenced by the strict Puritan beliefs that dominated the community. Puritanism was characterized by a strong belief in predestination, a notion that God had already determined who would be saved and who would be damned. This belief created a culture of fear and uncertainty, where individuals constantly sought signs of divine favor or disfavor. The Puritans believed they were living in a spiritual battle against evil forces, which made them more susceptible to the idea that witchcraft was a tangible threat. The trials became a manifestation of this belief, where accusations were framed as battles against these perceived evil forces. Interestingly, the role of religious leaders was paramount in perpetuating the trials. Figures like Reverend Samuel Parris were not only community leaders, but also spiritual authorities whose interpretations of scripture carried significant weight. They used their pulpits to incite fear and rally the community against supposed witches, framing accusations as righteous actions in a holy war against evil. A controversial point to consider is that the trials may have served a purpose for some within the community, offering a means of exercising control over social and moral standards. By labeling certain behaviors as witchcraft, they could reinforce conformity to Puritan values. For example, women who were outspoken or defiant were often the first to be accused, suggesting that the trials also reflected the community's fears about female power and independence. A rare and surprising fact is that, during the trials, the accused were often forced to confess or name others to save themselves, creating a cycle of betrayal. This phenomenon reflects how fear can warp community bonds, turning neighbors into enemies. As we delve deeper into this dark chapter, we find that religion was not just a backdrop but a driving force behind the Salem Witch Trials. The intertwining of faith and fear led to tragic outcomes, resulting in the loss of innocent lives and a legacy that continues to remind us of the dangers of unchecked power and paranoia. The trials serve as a powerful lesson on the impact of religious fervor when mixed with human fallibility, urging us to reflect on our own beliefs and actions in the face of societal pressures. In summary, the role of religion in the Salem Witch Trials underscores the complexity of human behavior and belief systems. It challenges us to consider how our convictions can shape our actions and influence those around us, especially in times of fear and uncertainty. As we continue to explore this historical moment, we are reminded of the importance of critical thinking and compassion in navigating our own beliefs and the world around us. Witch hunts have occurred throughout history in various cultures around the world, but the Salem Witch Trials remain one of the most notorious examples. Most people think that these events were unique to Salem, Massachusetts, but the reality is that similar witch hunts took place in different forms across the globe, driven by fear, superstition, and social dynamic. In Europe, for example, the fear of witches led to the execution of tens of thousands of individuals between the 15th and 18th centuries. The infamous Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487, was a key text that fueled witch hunts across the continent. It provided a guide for identifying witches and included gruesome methods for extracting confessions. This book epitomized the cultural hysteria that surrounded witchcraft during that time, showing that the fear of witches was a widespread phenomenon, not just localized in America. Similarly, during the same period as the Salem trials, other regions in colonial America experienced their own instances of witch accusations. In Connecticut, for instance, witch trials were held in the late 1600s, resulting in several executions. Communities were often influenced by the same mix of paranoia, social rivalry, and religious fervor that characterized the Salem witch trials. Interestingly, a rare fact is that in some cultures, rather than persecution, women identified as witches were celebrated as healers and wise women. In parts of Africa and among indigenous peoples, practices related to witchcraft are often tied to spiritual and community healing. This stark contrast highlights how cultural perceptions of witchcraft can vary dramatically depending on social context and historical background. However, in many cases, similar patterns emerged. Accusations often stemmed from personal grievances, power struggles, and societal pressures. For example, in the European witch hunts, many accused were marginalized figures, just like in Salem. This reveals a troubling pattern where vulnerable populations, particularly women, were scapegoated for larger societal issues, making them easy targets in a time of crisis. As we analyze these events, it's crucial to recognize the underlying themes of fear and suspicion that drive such hunts. They remind us of the darker aspects of human nature and how easily societies can turn on their own members in the face of fear. The Salem witch trials, while infamous, are part of a broader tapestry of human history where fear and the need for control led to tragic outcomes. In essence, the history of witch hunts is a cautionary tale. It serves as a reminder of the importance of vigilance against paranoia and scapegoating in any society. As we delve deeper into the cultural significance of witch hunts, we see how they reflect our fears and beliefs, urging us to question and confront the societal dynamics that give rise to such dark chapters in history. This understanding can empower us to create a more just and equitable society, one that values critical thinking and compassion over fear and suspicion. Did other cultures experience similar events to the Salem witch trials? Have occurred in various forms across the globe, reflecting deep-seated fears, societal pressures, and historical contexts. However, the reality is that similar persecutions happened worldwide, revealing a tragic pattern of scapegoating and irrational fear. For instance, during the European witch hunts from the 15th to the 18th centuries, thousands of alleged witches were executed. The infamous Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487, served as a guide for identifying and prosecuting witches, fueling a frenzy of accusations and executions. In countries like Germany, it's estimated that around 25,000 people were killed during these hunts, driven by similar fears of the unknown and the influence of religious authorities. Strikingly, the motivations behind these hunts often mirrored those in Salem. Accusations frequently stemmed from personal grudges, jealousy, and the desire for power. Many of the accused were marginalized individuals, particularly women, who threatened societal norms. In Scotland, for example, the Pendle witch trials in 1612 highlighted how local rivalries and disputes could lead to fatal accusations, resulting in the execution of 10 people. In another part of the world, during the late 19th century, accusations of witchcraft among the indigenous peoples of the Americas also resulted in tragic consequences. Fear of witchcraft often led to violent reprisals against those who were suspected of practicing it, similar to the hysteria seen in Salem. A notable instance occurred in California, where a series of trials resulted in several executions based on flimsy evidence and community fear. It's fascinating yet alarming to note that some cultures historically viewed witchcraft in a more positive light. In parts of Africa and among certain indigenous tribes, individuals recognized as witches were often revered as healers or wise people within their communities. This duality illustrates how perceptions of witchcraft can drastically differ across cultures, often reflecting broader societal attitudes towards power, gender, and the unknown. A rare fact that might surprise you is that in the 20th century, the concept of witch hunts resurfaced in various contexts, such as the McCarthy hearings in the United States. The hunt for alleged communists mirrored the same fear-driven dynamics seen during the witch trials. Individuals were often accused based on hearsay and fear, rather than solid evidence, leading to widespread paranoia and social ostracism. As we explore these events, it's crucial to recognize the underlying themes of fear and scapegoating that drive such hunts. They serve as a sobering reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty when faced with uncertainties. The historical parallels drawn from various cultures emphasize the importance of understanding these dynamics, urging us to reflect on how fear can manifest in society today. Ultimately, the examination of witch hunts across cultures highlights the need for critical thinking, empathy, and vigilance against the tide of paranoia and scapegoating. By learning from the past, we can strive to create a society that values understanding and justice over fear and division. The legacy of witch hunts, including the Salem Witch Trials, serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of allowing fear to dictate our actions, urging us to ensure that history does not repeat itself. How has the memory of the Salem Witch Trials changed over time? Most people think of the trials as a tragic yet singular moment in American history, an event encapsulated by fear and superstition. However, the reality is far more complex. As society has evolved, so too has our understanding of this dark chapter. In the immediate aftermath, the Salem Witch Trials were often shrouded in shame. Many of the community members who had survived found themselves grappling with the guilt and horror of what had transpired. Families were left shattered. The scars of lost loved ones and ruined reputations would take generations to heal. Interestingly, many survivors became advocates for justice, urging reforms in the legal system to prevent such atrocities from happening again. This societal reckoning was crucial, as it laid the groundwork for discussions about due process and human rights in America. Controversially, some historians argue that the trials were a necessary step in the evolution of American jurisprudence. They highlight how the absurdity of spectral evidence, the idea that witches could harm people through dreams, eventually led to more rigorous standards of proof in the courts. Yet this perspective can be hard to digest, especially when considering the innocent lives lost during the hysteria. As we move into the 18th and 19th centuries, the Salem Witch Trials began to fade from public memory. It wasn't until the 20th century that a resurgence of interest emerged, largely driven by cultural movements and the desire to address historical injustices. In popular culture, the trials have been reimagined in countless works of literature, theater, and film, often framed as cautionary tales against the dangers of fanaticism and mob mentality. Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible, is perhaps the most notable example, drawing parallels between the witch hunts and the Red Scare of the 1950s. This not only redefined the trials but also made them relevant to contemporary issues of fear and persecution. A fascinating fact is that there are now memorials and educational initiatives dedicated to the victims of the Salem Witch Trials. The Salem Witch Trials Memorial in Salem, Massachusetts, was established in 1992 to honor the 20 individuals executed. Each name is inscribed on a stone, serving as a somber reminder of the lives lost and the injustices suffered. This effort reflects a broader cultural shift toward recognizing and commemorating historical wrongs, acknowledging the complexities of justice and morality. In academia, interpretations of the Salem Witch Trials have evolved significantly. Scholars now approach the events through various lenses: psychological, sociological, and feminist perspective. Feminist historians in particular emphasize the role of gender in the accusations, noting that women were disproportionately targeted, which has sparked discussions about women's rights and societal roles throughout history. This modern reinterpretation helps us understand the trials not just as a series of events, but as a reflection of societal fears and dynamics that persist to this day. Moreover, there's an increasing recognition that witch hunts are not confined to the past. Contemporary societies continue to experience scapegoating and persecution under various guises. Drawing parallels between past and present can be uncomfortable, but it is vital for understanding the patterns that lead to societal hysteria. Just as in Salem, we see how fear can lead to irrational behavior, which raises important questions about our responses to difference and dissent today. This ongoing discourse surrounding the Salem Witch Trials serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of unchecked fear and prejudice. It urges us to engage critically with our history, learning from the past to ensure we do not repeat it. As we reflect on the legacy of these trials, it's essential to consider how they shape our modern understanding of justice, human rights, and community responsibility. The evolution of the memory of the Salem Witch Trials challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about our history, while inspiring us to advocate for a more just and compassionate society. The trials may have ended centuries ago, but their lessons remain ever relevant as we navigate the complexities of our contemporary world. By remembering the past, we can work towards a future that prioritizes understanding over fear and justice over scapegoating. How does the future hold for the legacy of the Salem Witch Trials? Many people think that this dark chapter of American history is firmly relegated to the past, a lesson learned that has no bearing on today's society. However, the reality is that the trials continue to resonate with contemporary issues, providing insight into the dangers of fear-driven behavior and the importance of justice. To understand this ongoing relevance, we must look at the societal fears that still permeate our culture. Just as the Puritans of Salem were consumed by their fear of the unknown, of witches, the devil, and spiritual corruption, many modern communities grapple with their own fears. These can manifest in various forms, from xenophobia and discrimination to the hysteria surrounding social movements. This parallel raises important questions. What triggers these fears, and how do they affect our treatment of others? Interestingly, there is a growing body of research suggesting that fear can override rational thought. In the face of perceived threats, individuals often resort to scapegoating, targeting those who are different, just as was seen in Salem. This cyclical nature of fear and persecution underscores the necessity for education and awareness, reminding us that we cannot afford to ignore our past. In terms of historical interpretations, new research continues to emerge that sheds light on the socio-political dynamics of the Salem Witch Trials. Historians are now analyzing the role of power and gender in these events, suggesting that the trials were not just a product of superstition, but were also deeply entrenched in societal structures. This renewed focus can help us understand how similar mechanisms of oppression operate in contemporary society. Memorials and education initiatives dedicated to the victims of the Salem Witch Trials are also becoming more prominent. These efforts serve as a reminder of the lives lost and the injustices suffered. They provide spaces for reflection and dialogue, crucial for fostering a culture of understanding rather than fear. For example, the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, established in 1992, honors the victims while encouraging visitors to contemplate the lessons of justice and humanity. The legacy of the Salem Witch Trials has also inspired modern storytelling, infusing cultural narratives with themes of justice, morality, and redemption. Books, movies, and plays continue to explore the trials, often drawing parallels to current events. This ongoing fascination highlights the universal and timeless nature of the story, one that speaks to the human condition and the potential for both cruelty and compassion. Moreover, as we navigate the complexities of today's global issues, the trials prompt discussions about the importance of due process and civil rights. They serve as a stark reminder of what can happen when justice is abandoned in favor of fear and prejudice. This understanding is critical as we advocate for social justice, ensuring that history does not repeat itself. The future of the Salem Witch Trials legacy also hinges on the conversations we have about justice and morality today. As new generations learn about this period, it's essential to convey the significance of critical thinking and skepticism toward societal narratives. By doing so, we empower individuals to question prevailing fears and challenge unjust systems, fostering a culture of inquiry and awareness. In conclusion, the legacy of the Salem Witch Trials is far from static. It continues to evolve as society grapples with its implications. By engaging with this history, we can glean valuable lessons that inform our understanding of justice, community, and humanity. As we reflect on these events, let us commit to fostering a future where fear does not dictate our actions and where compassion prevails over persecution. The lessons of the past are crucial for navigating the complexities of our present and shaping a more just and equitable society for the future. The memory of the Salem Witch Trials has shifted dramatically over time, reflecting changing societal values and historical interpretations. Initially, these events were seen through the lens of fear and superstition, a dark episode that symbolized the dangers of hysteria. However, as society has evolved, so too has our understanding of this haunting chapter in American history. Most people think that the Salem Witch Trials are merely a historical anomaly, a bygone era with no relevance today, but the reality is that they serve as a poignant reminder of the consequences of societal fear and the quest for scapegoats. They underscore the need for vigilance against the injustices that can arise when fear supersedes reason. Historically, the trials were viewed as a product of their time, a manifestation of puritanical beliefs and societal tensions. As we examine the past, it's essential to recognize the nuances that contributed to this event. The evolution of how we perceive the trials can be traced through the changing narratives surrounding them. In the 19th century, for instance, they were often romanticized in literature and theater, presenting them as tragic tales of innocent victims caught in a web of superstition. Today, however, scholars are re-evaluating these events through a more critical lens. They examine the societal structures that allowed such hysteria to flourish, focusing on the intersection of gender, power, and social dynamics. For example, the disproportionate targeting of women during the trials invites discussions about how female power and independence were perceived as threats in a patriarchal society. This perspective shifts the narrative from one of mere superstition to a more complex understanding of societal fears about gender roles. Memorials and educational initiatives have also emerged, aiming to honor the victims while fostering a deeper understanding of the trials. The Salem Witch Trials Memorial, established in 1992, stands as a solemn reminder of those who lost their lives. These memorials are essential in ensuring that the lessons of the trials are not forgotten, providing a space for for contemplation and discussion. As we continue to confront issues of injustice, discrimination, and moral panic in contemporary society, the lessons from the Salem Witch Trials resonate more than ever. They remind us that fear can lead to irrational actions and that scapegoating is an all too common response to societal stress. Understanding this history helps us recognize the patterns that can emerge during crises, allowing us to approach modern challenges with a more informed perspective. In popular culture, the trials remain a source of fascination, inspiring numerous adaptations in books, films, and television. This ongoing interest reflects a collective desire to engage with themes of justice, morality, and the human experience. The narratives of the witch trials continue to captivate audiences, illustrating the timeless nature of these issues. Ultimately, the legacy of the Salem Witch Trials is one of caution. As we navigate a world rife with division and fear, it is imperative to remember the past. By examining how societal fears can manifest in destructive ways, we can better equip ourselves to foster understanding and compassion in our communities. The trials remind us that history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a living tapestry that informs our current realities. As we continue to explore this dark chapter, let us commit to ensuring that such injustices are never repeated, and that the voices of the victims are honored through our actions and decisions today. The lessons of Salem are as relevant now as they were over 3 centuries ago, urging us to question, learn, and ultimately seek justice in a world that often feels precarious. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please subscribe to our channel for more thrilling historical tales. Don't miss out on new videos. Hit the notification bell to stay updated.